We didn't leave the United States on a whim. It wasn't one specific event or one political happening or anything that just one day we woke up and had an aha moment and said, let's leave. It was more of a slow buildup over time, an accumulation of things that made us finally stop and ask, is this really the life we want to be living? In this video, I'm sharing 8 reasons why we packed our bags, left everything familiar, and started a life abroad. Hi, my name is Maureen. In 2024, I moved with my husband Jeremy and our 2 tuxedo cats, Damon and Pythias, to Bulgaria, and I make videos for expats and wannabe expats so that you can make informed decisions. Let's cut to the chase and delve into those 8 reasons why we left the US, and these are in no particular order, just as they occurred to me. Number one, of course, is the political situation in the United States. It doesn't matter, I don't think, if you are on Team Red, Team Blue, Team Exhausted, Team I don't give a rat's patootie. I don't think anyone could deny that the political situation and the political ambiance in the United States is contentious and toxic, regardless of which side of the spectrum you fall upon. And it's not just politics. It's been seeping into everything, to friendships, to the workplace, to road rage, to family gatherings. Now, we don't have this problem in our family because, quite frankly, when we get together, we're more about the food. But I know a lot of people have stopped having family gatherings because it's only a matter of moments before they delve into political dissension, and the next thing you know, the whole dinner is ruined. So it just was impacting everything. And even though it didn't impact us directly in our family, you can't live in the United States without feeling this mood of constant friction and contentiousness that just goes on 24/7. I don't spend a lot of time reading the news, but I do at least like knowing what's going on. And it got to the point in the United States where, because I was so close to it in proximity, I just couldn't separate myself from the headlines, no matter how much I tried to only participate in them minimally. So it just got to the point where this feeling was just all pervasive and all the time, or most of the time. And as bad as it is for me, I'm better at distancing myself in those kinds of things than Jeremy is. And he was just soaking this stuff up like a sponge and internalizing it. And it became a very difficult way for us to spend our day, and also not in line with our values. It's not in line with how we want to live our lives. My personal philosophy is this: I cannot control what goes on a global or national level, but I can control what goes on in what I call my little corner of the world. So wherever I am, taking care of my needs, my family, my neighborhood, my community, that I can do something with. And in order to do that effectively, I really had to take a step back, physically remove myself from that toxic environment that the political atmosphere in the United States is just making all pervasive. Since we left the United States, I do feel like I've taken a step back in terms of my being enmeshed in the political situation. Not by the way that Bulgaria's political situation is any better. They have gone through more presidential or prime minister changes and government shakeups in the last 5 years. I mean, it's just constant. But I'm removed from that. I'm not a Bulgarian citizen. And again, while I stay involved and I know what's going on in the Bulgarian government, I don't feel like it impacts me to the point where I carry it around with me in the course of a day. And likewise, that's how I feel about what's going on in the United States right now. I am able to get up in the morning, open the New York Times, read the headlines, be aware of what's going on, but I don't delve into all the minutia because, quite frankly, it's the same stuff, different day. There's tariffs here and immigration there. And while I empathize with these issues, and I do have strong opinions on them, I don't have to read all those articles to get myself all fired up. So a little bit of physical distance away from that toxic situation in the US goes a really long way in helping preserve one's sanity. Number 2, I wanted to get away from the environment of mass shootings and lack of gun control. So this kind of piggybacks on the political, and I'm not going to go into my own political views on gun control, but I can tell you that I got really tired of that low level fear of, is this the day that I'm going to walk into fill in the blank, a grocery store, a movie theater, a library, and end up having to duck and cover or run for my life. I got tired of every time I walked into a new place, mentally scoping out the exits. I got really tired of taking my grandkids out. And if we'd go to a movie or we'd go to any public place, that's what you do with your grandkids. You take them out to do fun stuff that they enjoy. How would I protect them if something happened? Where are the exits? What would I do? And I could play the scenario out in my head, which I felt like I had to do, because if it ever came to a point where I had to protect my grandkids, that's not the time to think about it. The time to think about it is beforehand. And that gets to be very draining and very old. And that fear hasn't left me completely. I did not scoop up my entire friends and family circle and take them to Bulgaria with us. I would have liked to, but they have jobs and lives. So my grandkids are still in public schools in Colorado, and I worry about that, but I don't make it a day in, day out part of my life. I have done what I can do to protect my corner of the world, and I have distanced myself. So now when I hear a sound that sounds like a gunshot, I think fireworks, or I think car backfire. I don't automatically think hit the ground. It's just not something that is part of my day. And it was amazing how quickly I released that. And just for, not for fun, but just for my own information, I went looking and did some research on the number of mass shootings in the United States versus Bulgaria, and it's laughable. I think the last year I could find records for was something like 2023, and that's defined as something with a gun that kills 4 or more people. That was the definition that I looked up. And then I checked with Bulgaria. I believe there was one in 2017, and it was a family dispute, and it was just the 4 people. And then the one prior to that was, I want to say 1995. And again, it was not a random mass shooting. And before that, I had to go back to 1970 something to find any mass shootings. So this is not something that Bulgarians worry about, nor is it something that we expats who live here think about. Number 3 reason why we left the United States is to avoid the crazy high cost of living there. Now, Jeremy and I are fortunate in that we don't live paycheck to paycheck, but nonetheless, I don't want such a large portion of my income going toward basic necessities like housing and groceries and transportation. There are other things I'd rather spend my money on, like travel. Leaving the United States helped us reduce our cost of living. We've been in Bulgaria 6 months now, and I want to get a year's full of financial data before I present that on my YouTube channel. But I can tell you anecdotally that our groceries are about half what they are in the United States. Our housing is about 2/3 less than what we pay in the United States. And our transportation costs, because we don't have a car, are minuscule compared to owning and maintaining a car or 2 in the United States. We only had 1 car in the US. Most people, if they're working outside the home, a couple, they're going to need 2 cars. So our transportation costs are probably under $100 a month, unless we rent a car to go somewhere, which we've done here, and those are also very affordable. We can usually get a rental car, depends on the time of year, but anywhere from $25 to $50 a day. And then they also have discounts if you belong to their loyalty program. And of course, if you rent for a longer period of time, then they give you discounts. So our transportation costs are quite low. That kind of financial breathing room changes how you live. You're less focused on your budget. There's less pressure. And there's just a sense of ease that follows us throughout the day. And then the other thing about one of my personal pet peeves about finances in the United States is the pervasive tipping culture, which drives me bananas. And I know there are reasons for it. I know waiters and waitresses don't make a living wage, and I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the last time I was in the States, I went to a small meat market. And granted, they give you great service. And I ordered some steaks, and they cut the steaks and they wrapped them up. And when I went to pay with a credit card, there was a screen that said, "How much would you like to tip today?" And I'm like, for buying meat? That's not something I think of as needing to tip, or any kind of a place where it's a self serve. You go in and I don't know, you grab a bag and you pick up all your bagels and you put them in the bag and you bring them to the counter and they ring up your order. You shouldn't be tipping them for the bagels you put in the bag by yourself. The tipping culture in the United States is just out of control, and being distanced from that is refreshing. And there's tipping here. I mean, it's typical to leave a gratuity at a restaurant of maybe 10%, but the taxi drivers don't expect tips unless they really go above and beyond. Like if they, I don't know, if they pick me up from the grocery store and they brought my groceries to my door, then I would definitely tip them. But by and large, this is not a tipping culture at all. And I find that just very freeing, and I'm glad that it's something I don't have to think about. Oh, and then one more thing in that regard, which really has nothing to do with cost of living, but it has to do with grocery shopping. Another one of my pet peeves are those checkout clerks. And I realize that they're being counseled and trained to do this, but somebody should tell these grocery store managers, most of us don't want to have a in-depth chat with the checkout person at the King Soopers. I don't need to be asked, first there's the ubiquitous, "Did you find everything you were looking for today?" Well, the answer is no. We're going to drop everything and go back and look for it. But that doesn't bother me too much, because at least it's relative to the reason of why I'm there. But that, "Hey, do you have any plans for the weekend?" I always want to snap and say, "None of your damn business." So we don't ever get that here. And it's not just because we don't speak the language. The Bulgarian culture is much different than the American culture in that they are friendly. They are always willing to help if you need something, but they're not that overly gushy, what comes across, in my opinion, as insincere from service workers when you are out and about and running your errands. So all of that I lumped under cost of living, a bit of a stretch, but those are things I don't worry about or deal with when I'm in Bulgaria. What am I up to? Number four, I would call, we wanted to experience different cultures. We don't want to die in the same country we were born in, although it's not the dying part, it's what happens in the middle. And we want to experience different cultures, different ways of looking at the world, and different ways of interacting with other people in our community. And I have to tell you, there's no better way to get that than in Eastern Europe, because they are a culture unto themselves. It's absolutely fascinating. I find it super interesting to look at how people spend their day and the little habits that we don't even think about when you're doing them in your own culture over and over and over, but are just so charming and interesting, at least in this point. We're still in the honeymoon phase. We've only been here since January and it's now July. But even how people take their coffee. So in the US, you run into Starbucks and you get your mocha latte, chai, blah, 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 whatever it is, and you pay an arm and a leg for it, and then they put a lid on it and you take it out to your car and you drive down the street while you're sipping it. I don't even know if they have to go in this country. I'm sure they do. Yeah, because they have food delivery and that kind of stuff. The coffee/cafe culture here is ubiquitous, and it's great. People congregate, not just in cafes, but there's little places to congregate everywhere, in big cities and in small villages. Most people have a bench or some sort of seating arrangement, even if it's just a couple of plastic chairs in front of their homes on the sidewalk. And particularly in the evenings, so now it's summertime, the sun's going down later. And it reminds me, well, it doesn't remind me, but I would think it would be like what life was in the 50s. I wasn't around then, so I don't know, but I was around in the 60s. The late 60s was when we were outside playing. And that's kind of what it reminds me of here. There are kids riding bicycles, grandma and grandpa sitting on the bench, mom and dad. They're all just interacting. And then people come by from the neighborhood and, hey, and they start talking And, the coffee culture is very predominant here. It's usually accompanied by a cigarette, which I don't think is a good idea health wise, but it just adds to that ambiance of people just hanging out and chatting. And that's not something that we see a lot of in the United States. And I find it intriguing. I find it calming when you're walking down the street. It's like, oh, look at that. There's the dog, there's the cat, there's the kids. And it just feels safe and very, very connected. And they will always say, dober den, which is like good day, as even to people like us who they probably know are not Bulgarians. So it's a wonderful culture, and we just like absorbing all of that and observing it from a little bit of a distance. And just taking that all in. And in particular, one of the reasons we chose Europe is because it's such a huge amount of different cultures. Whenever you cross a border, even though it's not that far distance wise, I mean, the Greek culture is very different from the Spanish culture and the French culture and the Bulgarian culture. They're all different. And we are very excited to start traveling. A side note, we got our Bulgarian residency cards yesterday, which now means we are here for at least a year without having to do any more immigration paperwork and hoop jumping. I am going to do a video on that because it was a fairly arduous process. And if I can save somebody somewhere, anywhere, some headaches in doing that, I would like to. That's going to be a very long video because there was a lot of steps to it. But yesterday we got our residency cards. So now we are free to travel, just not around Bulgaria, but also anywhere else within Europe. And we don't have to do that on our US passport, which limits us to 90 days in the Schengen zone. We can travel just like a Bulgarian citizen and go anywhere in Europe for as long as we want. And that leads me to number 5, which is pure and simply, we left the United States for the adventure. Now, nobody has ever accused me of living a vanilla life, but I certainly didn't want to settle into that in my old age, or older age. I find something very energizing in waking up in a place that has such a long history behind it. The history of the United States is a drop in the bucket compared to the history of where we're living now. And I just think every cobblestone tells a story, and it's exciting. I don't know how long it's going to be exciting. I am already at the point where I don't swivel my head as much as I used to whenever I walk by Roman ruins. So maybe I'm becoming a little bit used to the place. But I do like the idea that being out of your home country does feel very much like an adventure. And there's new things to discover at every corner. And those discoveries are not just about humongous, gorgeous cathedrals and old ancient ruins. It's about a new hiking trail we discover or a new restaurant we uncover. Everything is new here, new people that we meet. And it just feels everyday things here, for now at least, feel like an adventure. And that adds energy and depth and layers to your life that I found difficult to conjure up and feel when I was living in the country that I was born in and lived there for decades. I feel like there's a constant sense of discovery and removal from feeling like I'm living my life on autopilot. Number 6 has to do with the general quality of our lives. We were very happy to leave behind that culture of busyness that is so predominant in the United States. Here in Bulgaria, and quite frankly, in most countries that are not the United States, there's a real sense of, I think of it as lingering. And as I mentioned, there's a cafe culture, and they don't rush. They don't rush, but on the other hand, they don't do things with incredible slowness when it comes to service provision. So it's a real nice combination of both worlds. They don't rush when they're talking to you. They give you their full attention. They're not doing this with the phones while they're talking to you at the same time. I've never had that happen here. Not that everyone doesn't have phones, because they all do, but they give you their full attention when they are involved with you. But yet when you want customer service, if you're waiting for your, I don't know, dinner in a restaurant or someone to come to your home to perform a service, they are very conscientious and they show up on time and they're very polite. So it's not that slowness that kind of started to feel like passive aggressivism that we put up with in Ecuador. It's not like that at all. But they know when to take their time. They're very clear on what their priorities are, it seems to me. And they know when it's time to buckle down and get things done. And we really like that. And added to that quality of life is the walkability of the cities and towns in Bulgaria. Now, their infrastructure is not as good as the United States. Sometimes there's a missing cobblestone in a road or on the sidewalk, or sometimes there's doing some construction work. We're spending time in Bansko, Bulgaria, which is a mountain town. It's a ski resort town. We're spending time here for July and August to get out of the heat of Plovdiv. And the big thing here is a lot of the older homes heat with wood, and they get that wood delivered at this time of year so they can chop it and stack it. So you might be walking down the sidewalk, yes, and you'll come across this big, huge pile of logs. But Bansko is so small and has so little traffic that walking around it into the street is not a big deal. They don't have the infrastructure that we have in the United States. But nonetheless, even though the infrastructure is not as solid or high quality as we have in the United States, it's still very walkable. We don't have a car, and a lot of Bulgarians don't have cars. The bus system is dependable. Sofia, the capital, has a great metro system. Taxis are plentiful. They have taxi apps that work that allow you to call taxis like you'd call an Uber. So it is walkable and easy to get around, and we find that greatly enhances our quality of life. Number 7, better food options. So let's talk about food, because that's one of my favorite topics. In the United States, it kind of feels like your main option for dining out or even purchasing your food are the big chain stores or chain restaurants. So it's really, it's challenging. I guess it depends on what part of the US you live in, but in the Metro Denver area, it would be challenging to find a mom and pop restaurant or a little grocery store. They would just be put out of business by the Whole Foods, the Costco's, the Walmarts, the King Soopers, fill in the blank. And the same thing with the chain restaurants. Well, you don't need me to list all the chains. You know what they are, because if you're American, I'm sure you have the same ones in your hometown. We find it refreshing that we're able to go out and there's so many options. There's little corner produce stores and mini markets, and there are big grocery stores that we shop at here as well. But I don't see a preponderance of chain restaurants at all. There might be a KFC. And there's McDonald's. We haven't been to it, but there's McDonald's. They have the McDonald's wording in both Cyrillic and Latin letters, which I think is hysterical. Not the point of this video. So there are a couple of chain fast food places. My understanding, by the way, of when McDonald's came in to Plovdiv is that it was the first one in the country, and it was in the maybe late 80s. And it became the place to go. And for kids, it became the place to have their birthday party. And people would get dressed up to go to McDonald's because it was such a big deal. So my understanding is, I've seen pictures, is that people would go out and the men would have on, suits and ties, and the women would be all dressed up with the hats, and the kids would be all dressed up, and that would be their big thing, would be to go to McDonald's. Little side piece of Bulgarian trivia. That's not something that we run into in this day and age. We are mostly shopping and buying things at very small family-owned businesses, which I really like in terms of the quality of food that we ingest. And the other thing is, there are a lot of dyes and chemicals that are not allowed in the European Union that we in the United States ingest in our food all the time. And I think it makes the food taste better. And I didn't know that when I first came to Bulgaria. I didn't know that there's different rules and laws for food additives here. But I noticed that, of course, the food is fresher. Believe it or not, when I buy a tomato, it tastes like a tomato. When I buy a cucumber, it tastes like a cucumber. It's great. Now, the food here is seasonal, so I probably won't be able to get tomatoes and cucumbers in abundance in the winter like I do in the United States. But I'm good with that. I'd rather have a limited tomato eating season where the tomatoes taste good than have them available all year round and they taste really like nothing. What was I saying? Oh yeah, I didn't realize when I first came here that the additives were different. And the first time I ever figured this out well, I don't buy a lot of prepackaged sweets like, Hostess Twinkies and whatever that. I mean, if I'm going to make something sweet, I'll make it at home. But we were on a bus one day and I gave up my seat to an elderly woman that got on after I did. And she came and she sat down and she thanked me, and I kind of waved her off because, not that big of a deal. And she reached into her purse and she pulled out it was like a chocolate filled croissant, but it was prepackaged. And she pulled it out and she handed it to me to thank me for giving up my seat. And I could tell it was really important to her that I accept this gift. So I didn't say, oh, no, 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 no. And I took it from her and I thanked her and I put it in my bag. And Jeremy and I went out about our business. And we went to a park in downtown Plovdiv, and we're walking through the park and we sat down on a bench and Jeremy says, break out that sugary treat. Let's try it. So I took it out. Well, first of all, it was huge. It was enough for two people. And I wasn't expecting much. And I broke it in half and I handed him some and I pulled a piece off of mine. And all of a sudden it was like, this is really good. I mean, it wasn't bakery quality out of the oven croissant, but it was amazingly good for prepackaged food. And that's when I started to notice that things here are made differently. I don't know the science behind it. My guess is there's not a lot of high fructose corn syrup. I don't know. I've never, dived into that kind of stuff, but the food here definitely tastes better. We feel healthier here, and it's much easier to cook from fresh quality ingredients at home. And one other thing relative to that, I've heard stories about people who had allergies in the United States, whether it was milk or nuts or whatever, just allergies to certain foods. And then they came to other countries. I heard this in Mexico, I heard this in Ecuador, and I'm hearing it now. And they ate those foods to which they are allergic in the United States, and they ate them in other countries without any issues. And I just think it's got to do with all the crap that we put into our food in the US. So we don't have food allergies, but it's a nice perk. And it just tells me that the quality of food here is just much higher than what we were buying in the United States, and also considerably less expensive. And the last reason I've kind of already touched upon, we want to explore Europe. So we love the United States, and we know that we are fortunate to have been born, raised, educated, and had our careers in the US. But as I said earlier, I don't necessarily want to stay there until my dying day. I want to explore Europe. And as I mentioned, all those different cultures, every time you cross a border, it is so easy to access those different types of cultures. In the United States, you can get on a train in Boston or a plane and fly 3,000 miles and get off in, San Francisco. And yes, there are some differences, but it's basically pretty homogenous in the United States. Whereas I can get on a train and go a few hours from Bulgaria and I'm in Greece. And that is an entirely different language, different culture, different ways of looking at the world. So Europe is now at our doorstep. And now that we have our residency, we're very excited to travel around Europe. Bulgaria is just our base. We enjoy it here very much, but we're using it, in addition to it being our home base, we're using it as a base to travel out to other countries throughout Europe. And one more, I know I said 8, but I thought of one more while I was talking. And that is, we now live in a place where our family and friends want to come visit us. And that makes my heart really happy. We've already had visitors in the first 6 months that we've been here. And it's so cool to experience a new country and then to show off that country to your family and show them around what you have learned and see the wonder in their eyes as they're checking out these new places too. So any place where my kids are encouraged to come and visit is a plus in my book. I want my grandkids to know that the world is a big place and there's a lot more stories to partake in other than the ones that they hear in the United States. So the more that they travel, the happier I am. And if that happens to be traveling where I am, even better. So there you have it. Those are our prime reasons for ditching the land of, super Targets and Taco Bells. And while we do miss a few things, hello, Trader Joe's. Yes, we do miss a few things. And I did do a video about the things we miss in the US, and I'll put a link to that overhead so that you can see some of the things that we do miss about the United States. We are in balance, much happier while we are living abroad. If you're already an expat or just dreaming about being an expat, I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you're living in a country that is not the one that you were born in, and there are reasons that you left your home country that I didn't talk about, or if you just agree with some of mine, please drop a comment. We'd love to hear from you. Please remember to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.